This is another of my sort of walks through Shrewsbury using old prints and old photographs. This time we're going to start off at the column, walk past the Abbey, over the English Bridge, up Wyle Cop, down Fish Street to St Mary's and Dogpole, and come back on ourselves to Old St Chad's. So our starting point is what's known as Lord Hill's Common. It commemorates General Rowland Hill, or the first Viscount Hill, and if you add the statue to the column, it's actually higher than the monument to the British Library at Gibbside, and its diameter is actually wider than Nelson's column, not including the pedestal, so quite impressive. Now, just down from the column is a building known as Whitehall. In fact, the area's Whitehall Road. I think it's even called Whitehall. It's sort of between Abbey Foregate and Monkmoor. And I always used to think it's because it was government offices, and there are government offices inside it, and of course the Shire Hall's not far. But no, people in Shropshire tend to be very blunt, and it's called Whitehall because it was a white hall. Why was it painted white? Well, the owner, who was Richard Prince, had actually stolen the rocks from the Abbey to build his white hall, and in order to disguise the fact, he painted it white. In 1083, Roger de Montgomery founded the Benedictine Abbey of Shrewsbury, which we now know as the Abbey. Although it was probably already used as a Saxon chapel prior to the Norman conquest. Certainly it's mentioned in the Domesday Book. Now, it did become very extensive, covering much of what is now Abbey Foregate, and going across the road, and indeed you can see this pulpit that still remains on the other side of the road, sort of, just cut off from everything else. So why did this happen? Well, of course, it was the dissolution of the monasteries that caused its real fate. Well, I say caused its real fate. That caused it to be split up. But the real damage was done by Thomas Telford as he drove a road through it to go to Holyhead, and thus enabling transport to Ireland. Why did the Abbey become so big and so famous? Well, around 1137-38, Robert of Shrewsbury negotiated the remains of St Winifred of Grythrain in Wales to be brought to the Abbey. So it was a place of significant pilgrimage. That's right, the same St Winifred whose shrine is at Holywell in North Wales, which, if you've not been, you really must visit. Wonderful place. After the dissolution of the monasteries, well, I say after, it had always been a parish church for the Abbey area, but after the dissolution of the monasteries and its breakup, it became simply a parish church for the area of Abbey Foregate, and it's known as the Holy Cross Church, even though everybody calls it the Abbey. Now, there has been a river crossing where the English Bridge is since Norman times, and I understand it was originally called the Stone Bridge, despite being partially made of timber. The bridge you see in these pictures was John Gwyn's design, completed in 1774. However, the new bridge was a design put forward by Arthur W. Ward, the borough surveyor, in 1921, and it lowered the bridge, and indeed lowered the approaches to the bridge, making it much easier for traffic. Now, the English Bridge is one of only two main crossings across the Severn to get into the town of Shrewsbury. The other way is by the station, which I will do a subsequent vlog on. But the importance of this bridge was that it followed, it was part of Thomas Telford's Holyhead Road, which was the main route from London to Ireland. So a very important crossing and a very important road. Now, as you cross the English Bridge, you then come to Wyle Cop, very steep 16th and 18th century street in Shrewsbury that leads up to very steep climb up to the town. In fact, it was so steep that the Lion, which is at the end, a coaching in, by that there had to be some winding gear for heavy wagons to be pulled up the Cop. It's home to over 800 listed buildings, and a big deal is made of the fact that many of the buildings contain independent retailers. Without any consideration, of course they do. Around 40 years ago, or even 50 years ago, shops were, multiples were complaining that these medieval buildings weren't suited to the needs of modern retailing. They were too small, they had too many little corners, etc. So we first built the Riverside Centre, and then that didn't seem to work, so we built the Darwin and the Pride Hill Centres. Then they said they wanted out of town, so we built places like the Meal Retail Centre and the Halscott Centres. And now it's gone online, and all of these are becoming redundant. Well, thank God we didn't lose somewhere like Wyle Cop, eh? And as we go along it, there's Tanners, the independent wine merchants. There's the Nag's Head pub, supposedly the most haunted pub in Shrewsbury. On the other side is Henry Tudor's house. And then at the top is the wonderful Lion Hotel. Seen better days, but, famous coaching inn, where apparently the coach ran to London in 16 hours. And where Thomas de Quincey wrote Confessions of an Opium Eater. Now, St Julian's is no longer a consecrated church, it's actually a craft centre. But it was supposedly one of the 4 Saxon foundation churches in Shrewsbury. I actually believe that it was a monastery early on, so maybe it was both a church and a monastery. The tower that you can see does date back to the 12th century, but the main church was from the 18th century, and the interior, the nave, was designed by Thomas Farnell Pritchard, who also designed the Iron Bridge at Ironbridge. Now, Fish Street is so called because it's where the fish market was. And appropriately, there is the Free Fishes pub on Fish Street, which apparently in olden times, I am going back now, and most recently is famous for being the first pub to ban smoking inside in Shrewsbury. But in olden times, it was a house of ill repute. When I was telling you about Whitehall, I did mention that Shrewsbury people, or Shropshire people certainly, are noted for their candidness and bluntness, certainly when choosing names. So we now come to Grope Lane, and it wasn't just called Grope Lane, it was Grope Sea Lane, so, you know, groping a part of the female's anatomy. So no guesses for what this street was famous for, this little shut was famous for. And it leads up to the Bare Steps, which nobody really knows. Was it built on a former site of bear baiting, or was it built on the former site of a pub called the Bear? I mean, it could well be both. I actually remember them being restored when I was a child, and a wonderful job they've made of it. I've just been researching the Vikings in Shropshire, who played a much bigger part than has traditionally been thought. It would seem that when the five boroughs of the East Midlands were taken by the Vikings, then the Mercians themselves fled west, and it would seem that Shrewsbury was one of their peripatetic capitals. Certainly Queen Ethelfeda, located in Shrewsbury. She was actually the daughter of Alfred the Great, and apparently she loved Shrewsbury, but she founded St Alkman's church. St Alkman's probably being an ancestor of hers. And you can see St Alkman's church because it's just at the back of St Julian's. So it runs along Fish Street, and then as you come up the Bare Steps, you get a marvellous, marvellous view of it. Unfortunately, when old St Chad's fell down, it caused a flurry of rebuilding activity in Shrewsbury. And that included the modernisation of St Alkman's. So much of the medieval church has now disappeared. Another of Shrewsbury's churches that is no longer consecrated is that of St Mary's. Actually a Grade 1 listed building. Originally, it was the Collegiate Church of the Royal Free and Chapel of St Mary the Virgin, a royal peculiar, and it was supposedly founded in the 10th century by King Edgar. But certainly by the 13th century, it was served by a dean and 9 canons. The building of the present church began in the 12th century, and it is incredibly impressive, and it includes a Jesse window, which may well have been, it's so impressive, that Nicholas Pesner commented on it. The Jesse window depicting the Jesse tree may have come from Old St Chad's, but then again, it may well have originated from Germany and actually have been stolen or plundered from Germany. The tower is the highest in Shrewsbury and one of the highest church towers in the whole of England, and that gives rise to the tale of what was his name? Robert Goldman, a showman who supposedly slid down the tower, or was he walking a tightrope? Anyway, he was killed in whatever he was doing, and there is a plaque to his. And as you get to the back of St Mary's, you approach the old RSI hospital, which is now apartments and shops. Never really taken off, to be honest with you. I remember the old RSI though. And then you go down a passage, and that brings you on to Dogpole, home of, again, some wonderful buildings and independent retailers, including one known as the Old House. Oh, and also Draper's Court. His name. Now, if you keep on along Dogpole, it gets you back in front of the Lion. Then you walk up again up Wyle Cop, and opposite Fish Street is another street that runs off it. Oh, sorry. And if you carry on, then that becomes High Street. But if you opposite Fish Street is what's known as Milk Street. So presumably this is where milk was sold, where the dairymaids would have been. And there's another old coaching inn on Fish Street, known as the Old Post Office, which is a rather grand pub of Shrewsbury. I've mentioned many times Old St Chad's and how it fell down after Thomas Telford had suggested that it be rebuilt. And, you know, the remains are still there in Shrewsbury, just on Milk Street. As the name suggests, it's probably Saxon, probably from the time of King Offa, although the remains of the church are much later than that. So it's probably somewhere in the grounds of the church. However, there is some medieval Welsh literature which suggests that it could even have been built on the site of a Celtic church. Now, why I say this Old St Chad's was much later, there was a great fire in Shrewsbury in 1394 which largely destroyed Old St Chad's. So much of it was rebuilt then, although maybe on Saxon foundations. Now, as I say, Thomas Telford warned that it was going to fall down, and the central tower collapsed in 1788, and that's when it was decided to build the new St Chad's Church.